The waitress found them there the next morning, asleep at the same booth where they'd met as strangers just 12 hours earlier. David's arm was draped protectively around his daughter Emma's shoulders, while across the table, Sophia rested her head against her son Ethan's, their hands still loosely intertwined on the tabletop. Four people who had entered the diner as two separate, broken families had somehow become something else entirely by dawn. If this story already has you feeling something, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real stories that remind us how unexpected connections can change everything. Your support helps us share these moments that matter. David Matthews had been staring at the same laminated menu for nearly 10 minutes, though he'd ordered the same thing at Rosie's diner every Friday night for the past year. The booth felt too large for just him and his 8-year-old daughter Emma, who was quietly coloring on her kid's menu, her blonde curls falling across her face. The empty space across from them seemed to mock him, a constant reminder of his wife's absence. "What are you thinking tonight, sweetheart? Pancakes or grilled cheese?" David asked, trying to inject some enthusiasm into his voice. Emma shrugged without looking up. "Whatever." David sighed. Emma's one-word answers had become the norm since Sarah had left them 14 months ago. The divorce had been finalized 6 months later, and Sarah had moved across the country for a fresh start, with minimal contact since. These Friday night dinners had started as an attempt to create a new tradition, something that belonged just to the two of them, but lately, they felt more like another reminder of what they'd lost. "I think I'll get the meatloaf," David said, more to fill the silence than anything else. "Maybe you could try the chicken tenders. You used to love those." Emma just continued coloring, pressing the crayon so hard against the paper that it snapped in half. David watched as his daughter's lower lip trembled slightly before she composed herself, reaching for another crayon as if nothing had happened. The diner was unusually quiet for a Friday evening. A few regulars sat at the counter, and an elderly couple occupied a booth near the window. David checked his watch, 7:15 p.m. They'd be home by 8:30, and he'd tuck Emma into bed before retreating to his home office to catch up on work. Another Friday night in the life they now lived. The bell above the door jingled, and David glanced up out of habit. A woman around his age entered, holding the hand of a boy who looked to be about Emma's age. They both appeared disheveled and tired. The woman's dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were visible circles under her eyes. The boy's jacket was zipped unevenly, and his shoelaces were untied. David watched as they approached the counter, where Doris, the night manager, spoke to them in hushed tones. The woman fumbled in her purse, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. David couldn't hear their conversation, but he recognized the look of quiet desperation on the woman's face. He'd seen it in his own mirror often enough. After a moment, the woman nodded and turned to leave, gently tugging her son's hand. As they passed David's booth, the boy's stomach growled loudly enough for David to hear. The child looked embarrassed, pressing his free hand against his middle. "Mom," the boy whispered, "I'm really hungry." The woman stopped, closing her eyes briefly before kneeling down to her son's level. "I know, Ethan. We'll figure something out when we get back to the motel, okay? Maybe there's a vending machine." Before David knew what he was doing, he cleared his throat. "Excuse me." The woman looked up, wariness immediately crossing her features. "I couldn't help overhearing," David said, feeling suddenly awkward. "My daughter and I always order too much food. We'd be happy to have you join us if you'd like." The woman straightened, pride flashing in her eyes. "That's very kind, but we couldn't impose." "It's not an imposition," David insisted, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Actually, it would be nice to have some company." He glanced at Emma, who was now watching the interaction with curiosity, the most interest she'd shown in anything all evening. The woman hesitated, looking down at her son whose eyes were fixed longingly on a plate of fries being carried to another table. "My son's hungry," she finally said, her voice soft but steady. "Can we stay a while?" Something in David's chest loosened at her words. Please do. The woman extended her hand. I'm Sophia. This is my son, Ethan. David, he replied, shaking her hand. And this is my daughter, Emma. As Sophia and Ethan slid into the booth across from them, David noticed Emma sitting up straighter, her eyes fixed on the boy who looked back at her with equal interest. I like your drawing, Ethan said, pointing to Emma's colorful creation. Emma pushed it across the table. You can have it if you want. David couldn't remember the last time his daughter had voluntarily spoken to someone new, let alone offered one of her precious drawings. He caught Sophia's eye, and she gave him a small, tired smile that somehow conveyed both gratitude and understanding. So, David said, handing Sophia a menu, what brings you to Rosie's tonight? Sophia's fingers tightened around the menu. We're just passing through. Heading to my sister's place in Portland. There was more to the story, David could sense it, but he didn't press. Instead, he waved Doris over and encouraged Sophia and Ethan to order whatever they wanted. As the evening progressed, the initial awkwardness gave way to something unexpected. Emma and Ethan discovered they both loved the same superhero movies and had the same favorite ice cream flavor. They took turns drawing on the back of the paper placemats while the adults talked. Sophia, it turned out, had been a kindergarten teacher before Ethan was born. David shared that he worked in architectural design, mostly from home now so he could be there for Emma after school. It's not easy doing it all on your own, Sophia said quietly as the kids became absorbed in an elaborate tic-tac-toe tournament. No, David agreed. It's not. Bit by bit, their stories emerged. David explained about Sarah leaving, how she'd decided family life wasn't what she wanted after all. Sophia revealed that she and Ethan had left their home in Nevada 3 days ago, after years of enduring her husband's escalating verbal abuse. The final straw was when he started talking to Ethan the same way he talked to me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I packed what I could fit in our car while he was at work and just left. My sister doesn't know we're coming yet. I was too afraid he might somehow find out if I called her. You did the right thing, David told her, fighting the urge to reach across the table and take her hand. I know, Sophia nodded. But I didn't plan very well. I thought the cash I had saved would last longer, but motel rooms are more expensive than I remembered, and the car needed repairs yesterday. She trailed off, looking embarrassed. We've all been there, David said gently. Sometimes the right decision doesn't come with the luxury of perfect planning. As the diner began to empty, Doris brought over fresh coffee without being asked. We close at 10, but take your time, she said with a knowing smile. By then, Emma had moved to sit beside Ethan, and they were huddled over a paper fortune teller she was teaching him to make. David couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his daughter so animated, so present. She's wonderful, Sophia said, following his gaze. You're doing a good job, David. Something about the simple validation from another parent, another single parent who understood, made David's throat tighten unexpectedly. So are you, he replied. Ethan is a great kid. When 10 o'clock approached, David found himself reluctant to end the evening. Where are you staying tonight? He asked Sophia as she helped Ethan into his jacket. Her smile faltered. We were at the Sunset Motel, but we'll need to find somewhere else tomorrow. Somewhere, less expensive. David hesitated only briefly before saying, I have a guest room. And Emma's been begging for a sleepover for months. This wasn't strictly true, but Emma's enthusiastic nod suggested she wouldn't contradict him. Can we, Mom? Please? Ethan asked, bouncing on his toes. Sophia looked torn. It's very kind, but we've already imposed enough. It's not an imposition, David said, echoing his words from earlier. It's just, one parent helping another. And I think our kids would like it. After a moment's consideration, Sophia nodded. Just for tonight. Thank you. That night turned into the next morning, which turned into Sophia and Ethan staying for the weekend to rest before continuing their journey. David helped Sophia contact her sister, who was overjoyed to hear from her and insisted they take all the time they needed before traveling to Portland. The days stretched into a week, then two. Emma and Ethan became inseparable, and the house that had felt too empty for so long was suddenly filled with laughter and noise. David found himself looking forward to coming downstairs each morning, knowing Sophia would be there with coffee already brewing, planning the day's activities for the kids. They fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Sophia found a part-time job at the local library, contributing to household expenses despite David's insistence that it wasn't necessary. In the evenings, after the kids were asleep, they would talk for hours on the back porch, sharing stories and dreams they'd almost forgotten they had. 1 month after that fateful night at Rosie's diner, David and Sophia sat on that same porch, watching Emma and Ethan chase fireflies in the backyard. "My sister called again today," Sophia said, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea. "She wants to know when we're coming." David's heart sank, though he'd been expecting this conversation. "And what did you tell her?" Sophia turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the porch light. "I told her I'm not sure we're coming anymore. At least, not to stay." David set his own mug down carefully. "What are you saying, Sophia?" "I'm saying that Ethan and I have found something here that we didn't expect. Something that feels like..." She paused, searching for the right word, home. David reached for her hand, his heart pounding. "I was thinking the same thing. Emma hasn't had a nightmare in weeks. She's talking again, really talking. And I..." He took a deep breath. "I've never felt this way about anyone, Sophia. Not even Sarah." "I'm scared," Sophia admitted. "What if this is too fast? What if we're just two lonely people grabbing onto the first good thing that came along?" "Maybe we are," David said. "But does that make it any less real? Any less worth exploring?" In the yard, Emma had taken Ethan's hand, leading him to a particularly bright cluster of fireflies. Their laughter floated back to the porch, a sound so pure it made David's chest ache with gratitude. "I think," Sophia said slowly, "that sometimes the universe puts people in our path exactly when we need them most. And maybe we're supposed to be brave enough to recognize it when it happens." David squeezed her hand. "Stay. Not as our guests anymore. Stay because this feels right. Because in just 1 month, the four of us have created something beautiful from our broken pieces." Tears glistened in Sophia's eyes as she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "We'll stay." 6 months later, they returned to Rosie's diner, taking the same booth where they'd first met. Doris greeted them with a knowing smile, bringing over chocolate milkshakes for the kids without being asked. "Special occasion?" she inquired, noting their dressed-up appearance. David and Sophia exchanged glances, and Emma giggled, unable to contain her excitement. "We just came from the courthouse," David explained. "We wanted to celebrate where it all began." Doris's eyes widened as she spotted the simple gold bands on their left hands. "Well, I'll be. Congratulations." As Doris hurried off to tell the cook the news, Sophia leaned across the table to take David's hand. "Did you ever imagine, that night when I asked if we could stay a while, that a while would turn into forever?" David shook his head, his throat tight with emotion. "I just knew I didn't want to eat alone anymore." "And now you never will," Sophia promised. Emma and Ethan, now officially siblings, clinked their milkshake glasses together in celebration, chocolate mustaches forming on their upper lips. That night, as they all piled onto the couch for a family movie night, David looked around at the three faces that had become his world and marveled at how completely his life had transformed. From the emptiness of that booth at Rosie's to the fullness of his heart now, all because a hungry little boy and his brave mother had needed a place to stay for a while. Sometimes, David realized, the most profound journeys begin with the simplest questions. And sometimes, saying yes to a stranger can lead you exactly where you're meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of hope, connection, and the beautiful ways lives can intertwine when we open our hearts to others. Remember, the family you find can be just as meaningful as the family you're born into. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to stay a while.